What's up, everybody? Welcome to System Crafters. I'm David Wilson, and today we're back with another installment of the live streaming series, System Crafters Live. So first of all, I just want to say hello to some people who are here this morning. Valentino, Jerry, Diego, Eric, Constantine, TZ Lee, Jerry. I said Jerry already. Let's see, John, Miljan, Drishal, Simon, Henrik. Henrik, don't fall off the roof. You'll be in more pain than you were yesterday. Marcin, Rune, Horatio. Nice to see everybody today. Thank you so much for joining. Hey, Ebenzail, Mark. I apologize for the lateness again today, but once again, I have more issues with my external display. Hey, Tomas, Michael. For some reason, every time I boot up this machine, my external display devices are available. Well, sometimes when I boot up the machine, the external display devices are available. Like if I use xrender to look at which display devices I can use for my monitor, my external monitor, sometimes they show up. And usually I can invoke them to show up by booting into Windows first and then booting back into Linux. And for some reason, that just wakes up the display controller so that those devices are available when I start up Geeks. Today it didn't work. I don't know why. I think it's probably because I trashed my Windows partition. The last time I booted into Windows to do this, I sort of just turned the computer off while it was trying to do updates, and I think I destroyed my Windows install. So now my little rebooting trick doesn't work anymore, and today I'm basically having to use my main laptop screen for all the streaming, which I guess it's fine to do that because I'm probably gonna have to do that the same way whenever I'm out of the country for the next few weeks when I'm doing those streams. So let's just do this as a trial run for that experience. I think it's a perfectly reasonable time to start doing this. Let's see, Hackatosh asks, what window manager do you use? I use EXWM. Hey, F Society, TRDV, Pavel, Technomag. Yeah, so this is it's an ongoing saga of problems that have been happening ever since I blew up my other machine that I typically use for streaming. Ever since that happened, everything has been going wrong. I think the reason why I'm having issues with the display driver on, or external displays on this machine, is this computer is relatively new, and there's probably bugs with the drivers in Linux for the display devices. So I probably need to run strace or something and try to figure out what's going on at the lower levels to see if there's some error or something that I can maybe help the kernel maintainers figure out the problem with, but I don't have time for that, unfortunately. Let's see. Let's talk about some other updates. So this week we were supposed to have Ambervar on, Pierre Neidhart, who is well known for working on the Nix web browser and also has some pretty helpful .file configurations and a great blog also. He wasn't able to make it today, unfortunately, so we'll have him again on another time to talk about his .files and other nice things. So today we're going to do a different topic, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Also, I was supposed to release that video for installing the full Geek system this week, but that also didn't happen because I ran into a bug with the graphical installer for Geeks, which it's funny because I didn't hit that bug whenever I was trying to do this installation process on a VM, but as soon as I try to use my actual machine to do the installation process, it triggered a bug with a certain type of partition setup that I have, and I think it's probably likely that other people hit this issue too. So instead of trying to just go through with the video, I didn't want anybody else to have trouble with it, so I'm working with someone on the Geeks maintainer team who actually, I think he's the person who wrote the graphical installer, to try to diagnose and fix the issues. So if that gets fixed, or if I can come up with a workaround in the next few days, I might record the video this weekend to be posted next Monday. But if that doesn't happen, then I may have to wait until I'm back from being away, because I won't have multiple computers to test with or to do the installation video with. So we'll see how that goes. I might be wrong about that. I might still be able to do it, but just want to make sure I'm setting expectations accordingly. I really wanted to have that video out because I think I found a good process for setting up Geeks using the graphical installer at least part of the way through, so that if you're installing Geeks for the first time, you can make use of the automatic configuration generator they have that will generate a starting config for you, and then use the non-Geeks or the full Linux kernel drivers and whatnot for the rest of the installation process. So I've got a good way to install figured out. It's just I have to be able to get past this bug in the installer that prevents that from happening. I think a couple people have written messages here that have been retracted. I don't know if YouTube is doing that. Sometimes it gets a little bit overzealous with the auto moderation. Sorry for that. Pedro says, I had a problem because I had an XFS partition, ended up not installing it. Yeah, it's actually an issue with partitioning, in fact. So for some reason, whenever I go through the installation, it doesn't, it fails to find the UUID of one of my partitions, even though the code that they use to find the UUID works just fine if I use it in the Geeks REPL. So there's something in the process of running the partitioning code that is got an issue. Valentino asked, did I change my camera? It's a lot smoother and better quality. You know, it's funny. I didn't change the camera. The only other thing I changed was the lights. I have different lights, but that wouldn't have made a difference. I think the difference is that I'm not using the external display. The likely scenario here is that the external display causes extra load on my machine, and now it's just not happening because that display is not there. So maybe it looks a lot better. It'd be great if it did. I can't actually see it right now because I don't have another screen to look at it, so I can't really tell what it looks like. Let's see. Garjola says, bugs in Linux drivers, bugs in Geeks installer, the challenges of system crafting. Yeah, it's kind of appropriate that I chose this topic right now because those are definite challenges to crafting a system config. All right. Okay, so yeah, I also mentioned a couple times that I'm going to be away. I'm going to be out of the country for my first actual trip somewhere since the pandemic started. I'm going to be out for like 6 weeks, but I'm not going to be away from making videos or streams. I'm still going to be doing all the normal schedule for everything. So the days of things, like when videos come out or when I do the stream, may change slightly, or maybe even the times may change slightly because I'm going to be in a completely different time zone. But everything should still resume as normal so long as I don't have any like loss of equipment or destruction of equipment on the way there, because you know how it is whenever you fly anywhere really, but internationally, and sometimes bags get misplaced or bags get dropped or things crush bags or that kind of thing. So hopefully that won't happen. Yeah, you know, it's not so great if the camera looks silky smooth because I have so many like let's say skin blemishes today that it's not great to be having such nice camera quality. I'll be in the correct time zone for once. Well, I'll definitely be closer to your time zone, but I don't know that I'll be changing the streaming time drastically. Pedro says, what do you think of eLisp performance? It's better now that we have Emacs native comp, but it's still not perfect. But it never really causes a huge problem for me. I mean, things can be a little bit sluggish at times, but it's not that bad where I feel like it's a burden to my day-to-day Emacs use. Now, Emacs in general and Emacs Lisp by definition is slow as it's slow as hell on Windows, and that kind of is a problem because now I have to start using Windows more regularly. So yeah, Windows, everything's slow and it's really painful, but at least on Linux, I don't know. I find Emacs with the new native compilation functionality is super fast and good enough for everything I need to do. I mean, I can tell there's been a speed increase whenever like things like workspace switching goes a lot faster inside of EXWM, or buffer switching, that kind of thing. You know, the stuff that you have to do all the time. It it makes a big difference. But yeah, if you have to use it on Windows, it's a lot slower. Marston says, do I use Emacs Geeks EXWM whenever I do my day job? Yes, I do, but I won't be able to for very long, unfortunately. Security policies in place that prevent me from using Linux. Well, prevent me from using Linux natively. I'm going to try to get a full setup working inside of WSL2 to do that, which I think is totally doable. It's just a matter of taking the time to set it up, because I mean, it's pretty easy to install a Linux distribution in Windows using WSL2, but then, getting the X server running with like full graphical applications, and then getting my whole setup sort of migrated over, it takes a little bit of effort. But I've already got some progress made, so I'm hoping that's going to work pretty well. All right, so today, the primary topic is going to be the challenges of system crafting. And as you've seen already, there's definitely challenges, or at least challenges of using a custom system configuration that's such as the one that I use, because sometimes things don't go as planned and you have issues that you have to deal with. So we haven't really discussed this in such a focused way before on this channel. We've talked about different things here and there, I think, on various videos and whatnot. But we haven't really talked about the specific challenges that one faces when attempting to build a custom system configuration. When I say a custom system config, I don't mean just installing Linux. I mean like actually choosing all of your tools specifically and putting them together in a way that's unique to you and to your workflow. So if you have used, window managers that don't have their own desktop environment, like let's say i3 or DWM or AwesomeWM or Emacs with EXWM, things like that. Plus picking all the other tools that go around that. That's sort of what I'm thinking of when I think of system crafting. You're sort of taking a bunch of different tools and putting them together to make your own custom setup and environment. So I intend for this to be an open discussion topic. So I'm not coming here with all the answers to all these challenges, and I'm also not coming with a complete set of challenges. I'm just coming with a set of things that I think are challenges and some ways to think about it and some ways to approach it. But I really want to hear your ideas and feedback as well as we go through this, because part of the point of doing this is to come up with ideas for future videos where we can go into detail on some of these issues and maybe provide some perspectives and maybe even provide some direct guidance on how you can approach some of these things. Because I feel like one thing that's been missing on this channel so far is, we've been doing a lot of videos that are tutorials on how to do things in Emacs or how to set up GNU Geeks, etc. But the higher level discussion about how to go about this, how to make decisions, how to spend your time so that you don't spend way too much time rat-holing on computer configurations and all that stuff. We haven't really talked about that so much, and I would like to try to come up with more of a body of work around that area, because I think that's more unique in the sphere of Linux channels and just general material. So yeah, we're just going to talk through a list of things that I came up with, and please feel free to suggest your own ideas for this as we go through. Let's see. Yeah, people are saying they've done Emacs and WSL works okay. Yeah, it definitely works. It's a little bit not quite as fast as native Linux, but I think it works fine. It's definitely better than using Emacs that's built for Windows, because that one is really slow. I think it's file system issues. Henrik says, why not a Linux from scratch series? Could be a brilliant bootloader for Emacs. Well, I would love to do that at some point, but I think we've got some other things to do first. Alex says, that'll be interesting to hear about the Windows dev environment setup. Yeah, well, I'll basically just be full screening an entire desktop environment and then doing my normal Linux setup. So I don't really want to spend time trying to make Windows a better development environment, because it just doesn't work very well for me. Ed Bowler says, I always thought the problem with speed on Windows was about how the file system was optimized. Yes, that is part of the problem. I think there's something about NTFS that makes anything that's meant to be run on Linux or Unix a lot slower. Like, for instance, if you install Node.js and you try to install a bunch of packages, it's super slow compared to doing it on Linux because the file system makes it slower. The other thing is, if you have like any kind of virus scanning software turned on that's actively looking at all the file operations, then that's also going to slow it down a lot. So there's a lot of things in Windows that would cause things to be slower. All right, so the first thing about the challenges of system crafting, deciding on the core tool set that you want to use for your configuration. And before I move forward, let me try to turn this volume down a little bit more. Okay, so there's a certain set of tools that you'll probably want to choose from whenever you are trying to set up your own custom system configuration. First of all, the most sort of central thing, in my opinion, is like the window manager or the desktop environment, or whether you even use a desktop environment or not, and you just stick with a plain window manager instead. It's difficult to make a choice on which one you want to use because there's a variety of things out there for this, especially in just the plain window manager space, because it's not super, I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's not super hard to write a window manager. So there's a few options out there, and they all have their own ways of doing things, which is great. But how do you choose which one you want to use for your own setup? Well, I mean, the obvious answer is you can just try a whole bunch of them and see which one works for you. But I think that while that could be fun, it might be a little bit too rabbit holey in a sense where you just sort of, try a bunch of different things and you don't really have enough time to spend with each of them to understand what the merits are for each of them. So I feel like, okay, so let me just talk about how I sort of went through the process of eventually getting to where I am today with window manager setup. So using Linux, I've been using Linux for a really long time, and I think I started with GNOME, and also KDE, sort of back and forth between those two, and eventually went to XFCE, mainly because I liked the fact that it was a bit more minimalistic, but it's still not very minimal compared to other things that I've used. Over the years, I learned about tiling window managers like i3, so I spent a lot of time with i3, used Awesome for a little while, but I kind of settled on i3 because I liked the way that it allowed me to manage windows. So there's a sort of a split between dynamic tiling window managers and manual tiling window managers like i3. So i3 is manual, so you basically are setting up whenever you open a window, it opens wherever your current focus is, basically, and the rule for how the window gets open is sort of based on how your window split, or whether you have like a tabs or a stack or something like that. So you have control over windows pop up because you are the one focusing where the window is supposed to appear. The difference between that and a dynamic tiling window manager is that the dynamic window manager makes the choice for you based on a set of predefined layouts. So first of all, you have to sort of decide whether you like the idea of controlling your window placement based on what you're currently doing, or if you don't really want to think about it, you want the window to just show up in the right place. Now, for me, I never really got into using dynamic tiling window managers because I didn't like not having control over where the windows go. I mean, obviously, you probably have some control still with scripting and whatnot, but it just didn't make as much sense to me. But that was just for me and the way that I use a computer. I've been used to a more Windows-centric way of using a computer for a long time because, you open Windows in a Windows environment, they just show up wherever on the screen, and then you use Alt-Tab to switch between them. So window organization really wasn't as much of a priority to me, so much as, like me sort of manually placing them on the screen wherever I wanted to. So it took me a little bit more time to feel comfortable using a dynamic tiling window manager, and I always just went back to i3. Now, eventually, I ended up using EXWM, and the reason why, at first I didn't like EXWM. I actually remember tweeting about that maybe 3 years ago. I said something like, Emacs is a great editor, but it's not very good as a window manager. And the reason why I thought that at the time is because I felt like the way that window management in EXWM worked was really weird to me. I mean, you could do a lot of stuff with it. You could place windows wherever you wanted to, especially with Emacs Lisp. But like how things worked across workspaces, how windows showed up across workspaces, the fact that it's very difficult to switch which window you're looking at, it didn't make sense to me at first. But I think that one of the blog posts by Ambervar actually helped me understand how you're supposed to use EXWM and think of it more like just, any way that you would treat buffers, you would treat your windows the same way. And, being able to use fuzzy matching across the names of windows and that kind of thing. I eventually figured out a workflow that worked for me where I had, certain workspaces that were dedicated to certain types of windows. And then I had less trouble with things not being where I expected them to be, etc. So, so I guess me explaining that to you is a way of saying you kind of may not know what your ideal workflow with a window manager would be at first. So you kind of do need to try things, but I think it's likely that you're going to figure out pretty fast what it is that you don't really like. And if you don't like a certain type of window manager, whether it's dynamic or manual, it's not really a big deal either way. Like, it's really up to you. The whole point of this is for you to find a way to set up your system that is the best for you and based on the way that you want to use your computer. You shouldn't really listen to somebody else and let them tell you how to use your computer. I mean, you can. It could be useful for the purpose of learning things, but in the end, it's up to you to make those decisions. Same thing for desktop environments. So at first, it's very nice to use desktop environments in Linux, especially if you are not familiar with using Linux as a desktop computer operating system, because a lot of stuff's already set up for you. So like, you know, when you plug in a USB device, you automatically get that mounted, you can use it. A lot of video codecs are already installed. Usually a lot of software that you might need is already installed. So it can be great to use those at first, but eventually you're going to realize I don't use a whole lot of this stuff. There's a whole lot of programs that are installed with this desktop environment that I've never opened or don't really provide any utility to me. So you start thinking about how you can get rid of some of that stuff. And that's sort of why I went from GNOME to XFCE. But even XFCE, you can end up with, you know, a fair amount of programs with that. And also, I guess the other issue that we'll talk about later is that these big desktop environments are not as easily configurable with text files as window managers, plain window managers are. So I think it can be useful to use a desktop environment, but you may find later that you don't want to do that. So I'm always a fan of being practical at first. So be practical about what you use. If you are not familiar with Linux yet, you don't want to overload yourself with too many things to learn at the same time. So you can just go into a more normal desktop environment at first, use that for a while, see if you like it, and then change something later. But eventually you'll probably, if you want to really have control over your environment, you're going to want to get rid of the big desktop environments because they're too opinionated and they have too many things that are running at the same time and things that you don't really have control over very much. So it's better to eventually get rid of those if you want to. If you like them, there's no point in getting rid of them. But I mean, just for me and the way that I like to use a computer, I don't prefer to have one of those. One thing that can be helpful from desktop environments if you don't use the environment itself is the session manager for a desktop environment. So maybe you've heard of GNOME Session Manager or XF Session, whatever it's called. Those can be useful for setting up certain things like key bindings and your SSH and GPG thumbprint entry, or sorry, passphrase entry, sorry. And they provide some sort of utilities like setting up dbus and some things like that, but you don't really need that. And did I talk about X Session? Maybe I didn't, but anyway, there's another program you can use to replace that, but maybe I should look into those older videos and see if I covered that and then cover it in another video if necessary. Anyway, moral of the story there is that eventually you're going to probably want to get rid of a bigger desktop environment if you're trying to make your own custom system configuration. So for shell, a lot of people have their own preference on what shell to use. And when I say shell, I mean like bash versus Z shell versus fish versus whatever else is out there. There's a lot of other more niche shells that you can use. Another one that is sort of up and coming is new shell, written by a friend of mine, Jonathan Turner, or he's working on that with some other people. It's a shell written in Rust. So there's a lot of different shells that you can choose from. Now, whenever you're trying to make a choice between which shell you want to use, it really comes down to a couple of big things. Number one is, can the shell run scripts that you find on the internet easily? Obviously, most scripts are written for bash or just plain sh, whatever that shell is. The really low-level one that comes in a lot of Linux distributions. So any script that you pick up on the internet that is supposed to do something like maybe set up a certain type of environment or maybe install a program or whatever, those are going to work for you with really no trouble. If you use Z shell, I think bash scripts also largely work because they have some kind of compatibility with that. No, thanks, Mark. It's born shell. So Bash and Z Shell are great. Z Shell is more customizable, I think. It has a better ecosystem of extensions that you can use for how you configure your prompt or other kinds of things that run in the background, certain aliases you have set up, that kind of thing. I used to use Z Shell whenever I used Mac OS and a little bit on Linux as well. But what I eventually figured out was that I didn't use a whole lot of the functionality that came with Z Shell. So I used to use Bash these days because it's sort of the default on Geeks anyway. And I'm fairly happy with it because I don't spend much time in the shell, or at least in the Bash shell. I spend more time in E shell, but even there, I don't spend a ton of time because there's a lot of things I use in Emacs that make the shell sort of irrelevant for a lot of things. Like, for instance, one of the biggest things that I used to do in the shell is git commands. But now, since I use Magit all the time, I don't use git in the shell hardly at all. And running other programs to get the output of the programs, like if maybe you're testing you're writing a program and you're trying to run it to get the output. There's stuff in Emacs like the compile command that you can use to do that kind of thing, and it makes it a lot more effective and efficient for running a command repeatedly and looking at the output. So if you get into something like Emacs where you have an environment that makes using text-based apps more efficient, you don't really need a shell as much, in my opinion. Now there's another shell, Fish, that a lot of people like, and it's a lot more user-friendly. It has some really nice completion functionality that you can use for certain commands, but it is not POSIX compliant. And if you don't know what POSIX is, or POSIX, or however you want to pronounce it, it's basically the one of the sort of Unix standard command environment things. I'm doing a really bad job of explaining it. Maybe someone here like Felipe could explain that better than me. But the idea being that there are some assumptions made about how you can run scripts or commands inside of a POSIX shell that are not the same in Fish. So you can't run a bash script in Fish, which can be a problem if you need to run some kind of script. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean you can't run bash scripts at all. You can have bash installed also and then just run bash with the script. So it's not necessarily a huge problem, but it's something to consider. You can't just run a bash script directly. Felipe says it's a family of standards for a Unix-like OS. Simon says Bash is a newer version of the Born shell, so it stands for Born Again shell. Yep. Mary says POSIX is a standard that describes how Unix should work. Yes, indeed. Hey, Adolfo. All right, so shell is another one of those things that's sort of a contentious area, but I think that to make a decision on what shell you would want to use, you would definitely want to spend some time with it, but you should also decide whether you use a shell enough to really make that a custom part of your configuration. Like, is it something that you use enough to warrant picking something other than just plain bash, you know? If you don't use the shell very much, then using bash is better in some ways because a lot of things are basically tailored towards bash to begin with, and things will work more out of the box as you expect them to. However, if you do use the shell a lot, there's nothing wrong with going and trying to use like Z shell or Fish or anything else like that. Garjola says, to be honest, I never grokked E shell. I tried Z shell in 1998 because my friend said it was cool, but I went back to bash quickly. Yeah, E shell is its own beast entirely. It also obviously is not a POSIX compliant shell. It's basically just a custom shell implementation inside of Emacs. But the thing that I like a lot about that is that you're using Emacs functions. The shell commands are Emacs functions, and any Emacs function actually is available to you in the shell. So if you wanted to write your own custom commands for it, you're just writing it in Emacs Lisp, and it can also do things inside of your own configuration. Granted, I don't do that very often, but it's something that is there if I want to use it. Ashraz says, see also shell check. I don't know about that one. Marcin says there's one called Xon shell. I don't know if that's how you pronounce that, but it's a Python-based shell. There's also a lot of shells written in other languages as well. There's a scheme shell of some sort. I haven't used that one before. Oh, Adolfo says there's a blog post from Ambravar about using Sly as a shell. Wow, okay. Interesting. Mark says, Z shell was a standard in my old company, but I don't do enough shell scripting to make me want to switch away from bash on my current machines. Yeah, I mean, that's really it. If you don't do enough in the shell, then there's really no point in using a different shell than the one that's already on your Linux distribution, in my opinion. Garzola says, who uses the shell these days when you can do meta X? Yeah, I mean, that's basically what I'm doing most of the time, is just running Emacs commands directly inside of the environment. Somebody asked a question earlier that I missed. Someone asked if there was so Appenzell asked, is there a window manager written in Guile? There is one somewhere, but I don't think it's maintained. Mary says Z shell is standard on macOS now. Really? Is it? That's interesting if it is. I know it's very, very popular on macOS. Ah, okay. So KHWPP says shell check is a great shell script linter. It helps you to write great portable scripts. Then that's useful. I need to look at that. Ed Bowler says if you're writing scripts, you should be writing bash. Yeah, if you want your script to be used by people on other systems, you should definitely use bash or sh at the very minimum to make sure that it runs on other machines. Technomag says, where does package manager fit in here? Well, that's a great question. Let me add that here. Mark says the macOS switch has caused some issues at work. Yep, I'm not surprised about that. Christian says, I want to learn Fish and New Shell. You should definitely try those. I've used Fish a little bit and New Shell a little bit. Both of them are really cool. Tomas says there's Cloche that's based on Clojure, but using a Clojure REPL 80% of the time. Yeah, I haven't tried Cloche, but that's it's pretty cool that they have that. All right, so the next thing, scripting language. So this kind of goes hand in hand with what we just talked about before. However, it's not necessarily something that you need to write shell scripts with. It could be just like general scripting and automation of things on your environment. So obviously Bash is a very good candidate for that. But in my opinion, there are other languages that are also really good for shell scripting. So Python is a very good example of this. Also Perl. Like over the years, there's been many, many Perl scripts and Python scripts written to automate things in your environment. And this is often important for people who have custom system configurations because you need to automate the maintenance of your own machine, like, updating your system, or maybe setting up your environment the first time that you use it, or maybe running some common tasks that you have. So, picking up a specific scripting language can also make a big difference in how you use your machine. So that one is a little bit more of a nebulous area because some people won't ever really write any scripts other than just really basic stuff, and other people will write a lot of scripts or write a lot of custom code for managing their system. So it really just comes down to what language you like, because at this point you can use a real programming language if you want to, like Python or maybe JavaScript or Scheme or Lisp or whatever, and use that for a scripting language. The only real question is, can you use the shebang line in your script file to say which interpreter should be used for your script? So let's see. Do I have let's open a file in bin. So I have a script called update dotfiles, and it has this line at the top, /bin/shell, basically to say which interpreter should be used to run this script. So the only thing you really need to have is a language that can support being run like that if you want to use it as a script. Like, you just want to use it as a direct command on the command line. I know that JavaScript can be run that way, Python can be run that way, Emacs Lisp scripts can actually be run that way as well with a certain type of command line, or sorry, a shebang line at the top. So a lot of languages can be run as scripts. So it's just another thing you might choose, but this is probably going to be a lower priority than other things that you are looking at. And it may just be driven by your own personal interest in programming language. KHWPP says Python usually is present, so it's great for scripting, but if you're looking for a script lang everywhere, Perl is the way to go. That's weird. I don't really see as much Perl these days. I know there's a lot of Perl out there, but I don't see people writing new Perl scripts, and I don't ever really look for Perl on machines. I don't know if I've seen it on many newer updates to distributions. I don't think it's on Geeks by default, but I mean, that's sort of expected. Garzola says, my scripting bio, Bash, Perl, Tickle, Perl, Python, and Python has been since 2004. Tried others, but none stuck. Yeah, Python, the syntax is very minimal and straightforward, and it has a lot of great libraries built in, so it makes it really easy to use that. I would also put Guile Scheme forward as a candidate for that. I've been using Guile more lately, and I think it's great as a scripting language for GNU systems, for sure. JP Ventura says, what is the difference between passing the script interpreter directly instead of using user bin env? So I don't know the exact mechanics of why that's different, but user bin env makes it so that you can not have to pass the actual literal path to the interpreter. And this is important because some Linux distributions put those programs on different paths. Some of them will put them in user bin, some of them will put them in bin. It really just depends on the Linux system that you're running the script on. I've run into problems with this with Geeks and also with other distros in the past. So typically when you use this user bin env, it finds the right path to the interpreter to run it. KWPP says, a few days ago I made a few scripts in Racket, and you can add a shebang, and it's really cool. List dialect language for scripting. Yeah, Racket is very cool. I haven't used it very much, but it's a nice little ecosystem. Lift Linux says, are you using EXWM? Yes, I am. JP says, legacy financial and genomics apps still rely a lot on Perl. Yeah, that's it's interesting. But there's a lot of legacy code in the world that's in languages that nobody thinks are used anymore, like let's say COBOL and other things like that. It's kind of scary if you think about it. So let's see, what else? Primary browser. So you can't really use the internet these days without using a web browser. So I think that it's going to be a very core part of your workflow. It probably already is, you know, if you're using a computer, because you got to get to websites. So obviously, you could choose something mainstream like Firefox or Chromium, and you know you can do anything you want with those browsers. They have great extensions. They support all the types of things you would want to do on a website, especially you know more complicated things like you know really complicated application-based websites, or you know crazy layouts, or you know videos and that kind of thing. But the thing I don't like about these very much. Thanks so much, Camelo, for the SEK 50 in Super Chat. I appreciate that. So the thing that is not so nice about you know browsers like Chromium and Firefox is that they are harder to configure using text. So I think you can do a little bit of that with Firefox, but I don't know how easy it is to replicate that same configuration to other machines, because they have their own format for storing their configuration. So you have to use a UI to configure Firefox, and there's a lot of stuff locked in there that's not very easy to sync. You can't sync your information very easily. You have to use their own proprietary syncing, where you log in with a Mozilla account, and then they sync stuff for you. Same thing for Chromium. You have to log in with a Google account, and they can sync things across your browsers. So I don't like using them for that perspective. I just feel like, you know, I have less freedom, and I'm being locked into someone's ecosystem whenever I use one of those browsers, even though a lot of times you have to use them for certain sites because, you know, the browser engines on smaller browsers don't work so well sometimes. However, if you can find a really good browser that is more minimal and works better with your workflow, and it's easier to configure using text and not with a bunch of fidgety UI elements, etc. Sometimes they have some of these better browser engines, like let's say Web Engine, which is the same thing that's used in Chromium. The Qt Web Engine package is used for, or library, I guess you could say, is used for both Qt browser and can also be used in the Next web browser. Probably some others out there, I'm not exactly sure. There's also the WebKit GTK engine that's used in VimB. I think it's used in Surf. It's used in some other smaller browsers like that. However, I find that WebKit GTK is not quite as capable for browsing modern websites. There's a lot of limitations that it has compared to the Chromium engine, or you know whatever that's called. I think it's called Blink. So picking a browser like Qt browser can be really good because it gives you that sort of more minimal feel. It gives you nice keyboard-driven experience. It's scriptable to some degree. Everything's configured using text, and also it's Python that you're using to configure it, which is kind of nice. So Aiming towards one of those browsers can be better for having your own sort of full workflow. The other nice thing about something like Qt Browser is that if you have a window manager like EXWM, you can set it up so that each tab turns into its own window, so that you can now allow your window manager to do the management of your tabs instead of you letting the browser itself lock you into its own paradigm for managing the tabs that you have open. It is a bit of a pain in Firefox or Chrome whenever you have to, like, okay, you've got this great environment set up for everything else, but then you jump into a browser and then now you have to change the way that you use windows and tabs and everything, different key bindings and everything else. So I kind of prefer it if I'm not limited by the interface paradigm of the browser that I'm using. But that's just me. I don't know. I mean, it's basically a matter of preference in this case. Some people will want to just stick with Firefox or with Chrome, and that's totally fine. But for me, I tend to prefer browsers like Nixt or Qt Browser. Nixt I haven't really got to work as well as I want to yet, but I want to spend more time with it because I feel like it has the kind of power that Emacs and Geeks have. I mean, obviously Lisp is a part of that, but it is meant to be very hackable and configurable. So I think that's the one that would win for me if paired with the Qt Web Engine library to have that full browser experience, or full modern web compatibility, I guess you could say. Lucas says there's an extension for Firefox called No Tabs, which allows you to have standalone windows. Oh, really? Okay, I need to check that out. Lucas, how do you deal with the storing your configuration for Firefox in a Git repo? Do you do that? Hey, Benoit. Garzola says, did you see Andrea's post on controlling Nixt with Slime? No, but I've done it before. You can have a direct line from Emacs to Nixt so that you can run commands in Nixt from Emacs, and I think maybe even vice versa, but that's one nice thing that you can do. Pascal says, Nixt would be so cool if you could run Firefox or Chrome privacy extensions. Well, I imagine they'll have some kind of stuff like that at some point. I think they do have a little bit of things in there for sandboxing, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, you can't run Chrome or Firefox extensions. And Adam brings a good point. The privacy extensions are what kills alternates. So this is a problem for browsers like VimB or even Qt Browser to some extent. Like ad blocking and whatnot is either non-existent or not very well supported. So Qt Browser does have support for the Brave ad blocking engine, and you can set that up, and it does a pretty good job from what I understand, but it's still not as good as like the extensions that are in Firefox or Chromium. So if you do use one of these alternate browsers, you will have this as an issue where maybe you're going to see a lot more ads on websites. I definitely do. It's really annoying, especially whenever you have these stupid autoplay video ads that eat up all your CPU and annoy you at the same time. It's really great. Oh, someone else mentioned Ruby. Christian mentioned Ruby is nice for scripting. Yeah, definitely. That's a good language for that. Adam says the modern web without ad blocking is horrific. Yes, I agree. It is horrific. Garjola says Benoit quit his job to watch the stream. I don't think he quit, but he's probably supposed to be working. All right, so yeah, so Lucas says I haven't managed to manage the Firefox config in Git with Stow. Yeah, it's a little bit difficult. There may be a way to do it, but I feel like it's going to be hacky if that's possible. All right, last thing, package manager. So obviously in most cases in Linux, you're not really going to have a choice on package manager because the one that comes with your distribution is probably the one you're going to be using. Now, on Arch-based distributions, there's a variety of different alternate package managers that basically use Pacman under the covers and then also are using packages from the AUR, but it's not really a different package manager per se. It has maybe different features and stuff, but it's the same sort of general packaging and philosophy. However, you can use Geeks or Nix as a package manager on another distribution. We've seen that in the video that I made about using Geeks as a package manager on your own Linux distribution. That can be really nice because it can give you the power of a functional package manager without having to have your entire system managed by that same functional declarative setup. Personally, I prefer to have the whole thing managed like that, but if you don't want to go the whole way to using Nix or Geeks, you can install those as package managers on your existing distribution and get a lot of the same benefits from those. So I think that's a very good way to go about it. Adam says Geeks on Debian is really great. Yeah, I think that if you are a programmer and you work with a lot of different tools, Nix or Geeks can be really useful for you for making one-off development environments that have only the tools and dependencies that you need to work on a particular project. So it's pretty nice. So it does, yeah, I mean, it's worth trying. I think if you want to try a different type of package manager, definitely try one of those on your existing distribution. There is a little bit of trouble using Geeks on another distro. I covered that in the video too, and hopefully that should be enough to help people who are trying to set that up. Benoit says, how about this subject? How to contribute to a project? Yeah, I'll definitely talk about that at some point. Garjola says, I use Geeks Package Manager on Debian. Debian is rock solid, but Geeks provides interesting recent packages. Oh, yeah, that's also a really good point. So Debian is well known to be a more stable distribution where if you install Debian stable or even Debian testing to some degree, the packages that you find there are not the newest versions of packages. And it's mainly because Debian is meant to be a more stable distribution, which is really, really good if you want to run it on a server, because you're going to have stable versions of software that have all the latest security updates, but not like the latest bleeding edge versions of packages. However, if you want to have newer versions of certain things, you can install Geeks as a package manager on Debian, so you can get the latest versions of whatever it is that you really want to use for something, like let's say the latest Emacs with the native comp functionality built in, but still benefit from having a stable core distribution and packages. So I feel like it's a really good thing to try if you want to have that balance between a really, really stable, rock-solid distribution like Debian and have some of your packages be bleeding edge and updated whenever you want them to be. Ed says, I use Fedora Silverblue / Toolbox for creating different dev environments for different projects. Yeah, I haven't used Silverblue, but I looked at it a little bit in the past. It seems pretty cool. Lucas says, I had to give up on Geeks as it filled my SSD up and had no inodes left, and I didn't know how to get around that. Yeah, that could be a problem. Geeks creates a ton of files and a ton of symbolic links. Schism says, do you share your show notes online? I sure do. I'll put these up after the show's over. But if you go to systemcrafters.cc, the website, you'll see all the video series and the show notes for those. David Vogel says, I'll stick with NixOS. Yeah, NixOS is great. Benoit says, the bot is running on Docker, running on Debian. Yep. Benoit says, Geeks GC. Geeks GC can help, but if you even have the problem with that, like when you first install those machines somehow, then you can't really even get to the point where you can run Geeks GC. I've also heard of people not being able to run Geeks GC because they didn't have enough inodes left to run Geeks GC. Somebody in the Discord, I think, was having trouble with that recently. All right, that was a lot of time spent on that one topic, so let's move on to the next one here. So, deciding on a workflow. So it's another aspect of system crafting. How do you approach your everyday work with your setup? Or how do you want to approach your everyday work with your setup? I mean, at least for me, I like to have a more minimal environment where I don't see anything on the screen except for whatever it is that I'm working on at the moment. But also I'll have separate workspaces where I can switch to things like chat or a web browser, etc. Like for instance, I'm on workspace 1 right now, but if I switch to workspace 2, I can call up a browser here. And then whenever I don't want to see the browser, I'll switch back to workspace 1 to go back to the work that I was working on. I may also have individual workspaces inside of this workspace, which sounds a little bit crazy, but there's a reason for that. With the perspective.el package, so I can create a new perspective called test. And then you can see there's 2 here now in the mode line. And I can switch between those with a key binding. So deciding on your workflow is going to be something that will take a long time. First of all, I think the way that it typically works is that you start using a particular set of tools together and you find these little annoyances or inefficiencies in what you're doing that make you feel like, this really doesn't feel great. Maybe I'll try a different tool instead. And you may go down the rabbit hole of trying different tools to see which one fits your workflow better, which is worthwhile to do. But sometimes it's useful to try to figure out whether maybe if you rethink the way that you're doing things, you'll get better results with an existing thing that you're using. That's sort of the problem that I went through with EXWM at first. I didn't really like the way that it worked, but it took a little bit of a perspective shift for me to get into a place where I felt like it worked really well for me instead. Garjola says, do you decide your workflow or does it emerge organically? I think that it's probably going to be a little bit of both. It's going to emerge more organically at first, and then you're going to start to understand things better and then make choices based on that. And another kind of a core part of this, in my opinion, is like how to best utilize workspaces. So if you have a window manager or a desktop environment that allows you to use workspaces, I'd say definitely do that, because it's a great way to separate different types of things you're doing in your workflow. And often the key bindings to jump between workspaces are really fast. Like in my case, I have EXWM set up to use the super key, which is like the Windows key on most keyboards. You can press like 1, 2, 3 to switch between those while holding the super key. And that's something I do like all day long. I'll keep my thumb hovering over super, and I can just switch between workspaces really easily. And it works great for me to do that. So I think that you should think about how you could use workspaces to your advantage to separate different parts of your workflow so you can focus on one thing at a time. Now, some people do like to mix stuff together, like maybe have a browser next to your code or the document you're writing, and you can always choose to do that. But if you want to have more focus on whatever you're doing at the moment, it's good to sort of separate things. That's just my opinion, though. I'm definitely interested in hearing other people's opinions on this particular point. But it's sort of a thing where if you're not used to using tiling window managers or more minimal desktop environments or window manager environments, you won't know the best way to use things until you either have done some research, like watch some videos that people are making about this kind of thing, or maybe done a lot of experimentation yourself. And then you'll start to figure out how you can work best. And it's going to be different for everybody, because even if the way that you think or how you approach solving problems is different than another person, your workflow with your computer is probably going to be different than the other person. There's not going to be one workflow that fits all. So it's kind of a cool thing to think about, that everybody uses their computer differently. And at some point, I would like to try to highlight that somehow, maybe through having guests on the stream so they can show how they use their computer or how they have their setup working. Obviously, Dotfile Detective is like one side of that, like looking at the configuration files, but that doesn't show us how the person actually uses their computer. So it would be nice to be able to get some perspectives from other people who have a tailored environment to see how they're doing things for maybe if they're like writing code in a project, or maybe writing a blog post, or searching for information, or anything like that, managing their system. I think it's something that we should look into at some point in the future, because there's a lot of really interesting ideas you could probably learn from other people and how they do things. Felipe says, I use Super for workspace switching too. I have a 48 key ortho keyboard. Super is under my palms on either side, and I hit it with bottom outer edge of my palm. That is, it's interesting when people tell me they use their palm to press keys. I don't know that I would trust my palm to not just press everything. So I tend to stick with home row keys for my most common stuff, and not use my palms for anything. Truth for Life says, good morning. Sorry for being late. I was late too, so don't worry. Garjola says, I haven't found the appropriate combination between EXWM workspaces, Emacs tabs, and perspectives. Yeah, it took me a little while before I felt like I had come up with the right combination for that. I don't use Emacs tabs at all. I just use EXWM workspaces for like the high level separation of things. And then I'll use perspective.el to separate the buffer list that I have for different purposes. So on workspace 0, technically, you see the presentation here, but you can actually see down here in the mode line, this is the chat workspace. And I have this so that I have all of my chat buffers for like Telega.el and ERC all in one buffer list, so that I don't have them in other workspaces at the same time. And if I wanted to have maybe a different categorization on the same workspace, I could have another perspective.el workspace also on workspace EXWM workspace 0. Workspace 1 is the one that I use for all of my project coding and writing, etc. And I'll have at least 2 or 3 perspective.el workspaces open on EXWM Workspace 1 most of the time, because I'm trying to keep those windows and buffer lists separate for those projects. And I found that it works out very, very well for my workflow. For Workspace 2, I have browser tabs, and I don't really use a separate perspective workspace on this one. I'll just have my Qt browser tabs and Firefox windows, since I use both of them interchangeably a little bit. And then Workspace 3 is usually like Discord, and Workspace 4 is just like whatever random program that I have open. Like I'll use that for my my GIMP windows when I'm editing thumbnails for videos, or I have it set up for OBS right now. So usually like the ones I'm switching to most frequently all day long are 012 for chat, work, and browser. And then those may have their own sub workspaces basically. Schism says, if you keep your browser in a separate workspace, does that mean that you don't often stop to do quick searches? Do you try to maximize research on the front end before you start to code? I habitually switch between workspaces, and sometimes you might see me on the stream flipping to another workspace, and I'm not doing it for a real reason. I'm doing it because it's sort of like my brain just fidgeting. So it's very easy and quick for me to switch to another workspace. So I'm often flipping back and forth between Workspace 1 and Workspace 2 because I'm looking at something in the browser on Workspace 2, and I flip back to Workspace 1 to go back to my work. So it's basically a matter of preference. If I ever really have to look at a browser tab at the same time, I'll put it over on this workspace, on Workspace 1, but I almost never do that, except for live streams like right now. Benoit says the IRC bot on Docker Hub has 666 downloads. Well, that's a great sign. It tells you that we have support from one side of the good-evil polarity. Mary says, I use workspaces extensively in my coding job, working with multiple repos. Yeah, that could be really helpful. Perspective.el is great for that, in my opinion. All right, key bindings. So, key bindings are a thing where you can also get into a lot of personal philosophy on how to set things up. One big question becomes, do you learn the built-in key bindings of the programs you're using, or do you try to customize them? And this is really exemplified the most in Emacs because key bindings are a very big part of everything. It's also very easy to customize the key bindings for everything that you want to do in Emacs. So it is an area that you can spend a lot of time on, and it's also an area that you're going to have to experiment a lot with to come up with your own way of doing things that works well for you. So the question is, if you start to customize your key bindings, how do you pick the right ones? How do you know which ones are going to be the best for you? I can tell you like a little bit of a story for myself on this to illuminate this process. So when I got more heavily into using EXWM, one of the things that I wanted to replicate was sort of this Alt-Tab workflow that you have in Windows, because and other desktop window manager environments on Linux have this as well, where if you have multiple windows visible, some of them may be obscured, you can hold the Alt key and press Tab repeatedly to cycle through the windows that are open. You get really dependent on this in a window manager like that to get to other windows and see what other windows you have available. And you don't easily have that kind of key binding in Emacs. And the main reason why is because Emacs doesn't have the concept of holding a key and pressing another key and repeating an action. To get a binding like that, you have to use something like Hydra or a transient key map where you press a key binding first and then press some other keys sort of like in sequence after it. So I could never get a really perfect exact configuration like the one that I had in Windows or other window managers before. So for me, it took a while to come up with the right solution for that. So the first thing I did, there's a package called bufferflip.el, I think, and I had that set up to where I could press Alt-Tab and then let go of Alt and then keep pressing Tab or Shift-Tab to go back and forth between buffers. So I got something like that experience, but I felt that I still was like cycling way too much. I didn't feel like I was finding the buffer I was looking for very easily. So then there was another one I switched to and I can't remember what it was now, Benoit says that he uses super plus up and down to switch. I think there's also a binding that's built into Emacs. Control X and let's see, Control H, J. I think it's either left, maybe left or right. Control X left. Yeah, Control X left and right can do cycling, but they don't have a transient key map, so you have to keep pressing Control X and the direction, which is a little bit annoying. But you could probably replace that with a transient key map pretty easily. Generally, though, I think, excuse me, I think that you can do something like what Benoit says, is like hold super and press up and down. Marcin says you could use kmonad to replicate hold tap, which is actually something that is very likely. You could probably do that. I haven't tried it though. What I came up with for myself in the end was two things. One is I took some inspiration from Ambervar. One thing he said on one of his posts was that for living in Emacs, the best way to think about managing buffers is to use fuzzy matching with the names of the buffers rather than trying to cycle through buffers. So instead of trying to cycle, pull up your buffer list, and then you can either use the arrow keys there to cycle through buffers, or you can start typing in characters from the buffer name and then press enter, and it's a lot faster than trying to cycle to find the buffer you're looking for. So what I did was I set up a binding for Control-Alt-J to pull up my buffer list, and then I can use Control-J, Control-K to move across the buffers to cycle them. That keeps my fingers on the home row where I don't have to move to some other key binding setup. And I can also use letters to filter. So that's what worked for me. It works great for me for now. I've gotten very comfortable with that, and I don't really want to change it. But there's plenty of other ways you can go about doing this. And as people have said in the chat here, you can just use, super arrow keys or anything else you want to use for that. So there are going to be key bindings like this that you're going to have to figure out what's best for you. And typically it's going to be based on what you're used to already, and maybe some tweaks based on what's possible to adjust to what you want to do, plus what is available to you in the program that you're using. Eric says, how does speed bar work in EXWM? I never use the speed bar, so I don't know. But having any kind of pop-up frame typically causes issues in EXWM. Pop-up Emacs frames. Now, there's plenty of pop-up frames if like an X window pops up. You'll have a frame for that, but like ediff and other programs or other packages like that will cause problems with EXWM when they start popping up their own Emacs frames. Benoit says layers and tap hold features are great. Got the caps lock to be control when hold, escape when tapped. Yeah, if you have a good keyboard, a lot of these things can also be solved at the keyboard level because you have like key layers and custom key maps on the keyboard itself. So that could be another way to solve that. But then it becomes a thing where you only get that functionality when you're using that specific keyboard, or if you're using another computer, let's say at work, you either have to take your keyboard with you or have another duplicate of the same keyboard. So I prefer to not have to depend on having a specific keyboard around. I'd rather do things in key maps. Garjola says, try speed bar on live stream. No, I'm definitely not going to do that because I don't want to break everything right now. Benoit says you have to buy multiple keyboards. Yeah, if you have these nice fancy keyboards, they're very expensive. So it's not nice to have to do that. This is why I like the, if I pick it up right now, it's probably going to destroy my setup. The ThinkPad USB compact keyboard, because it's cheap, and it also gives me the little nub track point thing. So that is pretty easy to buy a duplicate of because it's cheaper. But if you have to pay $150 or $300 for a custom keyboard, then you really don't want to buy that multiple times. All right, managing your information. So this is another aspect of system crafting that is maybe not so obvious, but it is something that if you come up with a custom system, maybe it is something you're going to want to think about, especially if you have to work with other people or maybe work with other systems. So which tool or format do you use for managing your information? Obviously, if you're using Emacs, you're probably going to use org mode because it does a lot, and it's a great format for writing as well. But you could use other tools too in other formats, like let's say restructured text, ASCII doc, Markdown. It really just depends on how you want to store information and whether that information needs to have a structure that can be used in other ways. Like for instance, org mode, you have to-do items, you have tables, you have all kinds of things that can be used at a higher level than just text. So that's something you'll probably make a decision about at some point if you care about, writing or managing your tasks and projects and stuff like that. Also, how do you archive this information? Does your tool allow you to commit the text to source control, or is it easy to save that information? Is it in a proprietary format? So if you're using some program, let's say Evernote, and it has an index locally, can you replicate that without their service? So I think that it's great to have text-based information formats so that you can easily check those into source control and treat them like any other text document. However, there's other programs that are pretty, what's the right word? Seductive, I guess, like Evernote or maybe Notion or things like that, where it's got like a really nice interface. Don't be seduced by the flashy programs, because it really, you all of your stuff will get stuck there, and if you switch to another program, it's harder to get that information out. Garjola says, I use org mode with git auto commit. No need for sync because I only use one computer, but I back up to my Raspberry Pi with rsync. Org mode with automatic git commits can be really good. I haven't got it set up like that because I haven't tried it yet, but I want to do that. I would really like to have that for archiving changes to my notes, so that over time, if I wanted to go back and see something in the past, I don't have to worry about saving another file with like some old stuff in it. I can just have it in my Git history instead. Like, let's say, for instance, a project that you finished that you don't really need to have the to-do item around anymore. You can have that in your history. Mary says, as a programmer, hearing the phrase git auto commit is giving me mad shivers. Well, yeah, it does sound a little bit crazy, and it's also scary thinking about the size of the git index over time as you keep auto committing every 2 characters that you write. But I think depending on how you have auto commit set up, it won't be so bad. Purple G says, I've been using sync thing to sync with my sync org files across devices. Yeah, that's what I use, and I like it quite a lot. And that was the next thing I was going to mention, is how to sync everything between devices. Git is obviously a good way to do that, because you can have a Git repository that you're sharing between computers. However, if you're doing something like auto commit, it can be a headache, because then you have to worry about merging those changes back together somehow. And I haven't come up with a solution for that, and that's probably the main reason why I haven't actually tried to set that up yet. Pengu says, org mode with git crypt and auto commit. Git crypt would be very cool for that too, to have all your stuff encrypted. Technomog says, for split ortho that's portable, I can recommend Keyboard IO's Atreus, 42 keys, hot swappable, QMK compatible. I haven't tried that. That'd be pretty cool. All right, integrating with a productivity system. This sort of goes back into the whole org mode point again as well, but maybe you use something different for productivity. And by productivity, I really mean project and task management, where you're trying to keep track of all the things that you need to do. For me, I don't do a very good job of that. I have to-do lists and I never look at them, which is my own problem. But how can you make that system a seamless part of your workflow and environment? It's something I haven't really shown on this channel or tried to put something together for, but I think that with Emacs and having EXWM as your environment, there's a lot of ways that you could streamline the way that you work, including stuff from a productivity system. So for example, it can be very useful to clock the tasks that you're working on with org mode. I don't think I talked about that in the org videos I've made so far, but I eventually will. The idea there is that for a given task that you have in your to-do list, you can start a clock in org mode to start counting how long you've been working on that particular task, and then eventually you can clock out of the task to keep track of how much time you did spend on it. And the org agenda gives you the ability to see all that information about how long you spent on something. So you can see like the chunk of time per day that you worked on a specific thing. I think you can also get statistics to some degree about the stuff that you have you've been working on, to see how much time over time you've been spending on tasks. There's a lot of stuff you can do with that, which is pretty cool. But what if you wanted to do something like, when you clock into a task, you turn off notifications for your email and for your instant messages and IRC and everything else, so that you don't get any distractions. This is where things like that starts coming into play. Also, showing your current clock or how many tasks you have left per day, in the day, you could have in your panel or in your mode line. There's a lot of things you could do to make the way that you work on your projects and the things that you have left to do more a central part of your workflow and the environment that you have set up. I definitely want to investigate that in more depth in the future, because I think there's some cool things we could get out of that, and this sort of Emacs-based setup could do a lot for you with that, I think. If you use other programs, like let's say maybe Task Warrior or any other kind of to-do list app, it's not as easy. I mean, maybe Task Warrior could work because it's a text-based format, but other programs, I don't know how that would go, especially if they're like graphical programs and they have their own way of doing things. It really just depends. But with org mode, at least, you could definitely have a very streamlined setup for productivity, I think. Nicholas says, I use Logseek and sync via GitHub. On my phone, I use a Logseek web app, and on a desktop, I use org mode since Logseek saves the files as org files. Interesting. Yeah, Ed Bowler says, I used to use org mode clock to generate invoices to send out to clients. I generated the PDF invoices from org mode too. Yeah, if I was a consultant, I would totally do that because it's great for that. Technomatic says, that's a topic to get someone else's show on stream, how they clock in, clock out, etc. Yeah, org mode, that's a whole other section of custom setups that would be very useful to see what other people do, because there's like an endless set of things you can do with org mode, or an endless set of ways that you can use org mode for certain things. So it's great to see how other people use their stuff. Mark says, I use org clock daily with a clock table report to not only know time that tasks take, but it also gives me a great overview of time spent during the day and week. Yeah, it's definitely a thing that can be good to help you to also make your time use more effective. Because if you see how much time you're spending on certain tasks, you can be like, oh, you know what? Maybe I should do things a little bit differently. Maybe I should break up the tasks that I'm doing and maybe switch tasks a little bit more frequently, or do a certain type of task a different time of day so it takes less time, that kind of thing. So it can be very good for sort of analyzing your own time usage and making changes on that. Adam says, major to help. I love Org Pomodoro. Major help to keeping me on task. Yeah, I've used Org Pomodoro quite a lot, and it is very, very useful for making those short blocks of time where you focus on a task. Pomodoros or time boxing are a big part of how I try to manage my time whenever I'm actually trying to really be effective and efficient on time, because it's easy to, if you have unbounded time to work on something, you can just sit there and work on it for 3 hours, but you're not going to make the most effective choices as if you did if you only had an hour to work on it, or even 30 minutes to work on it. So time boxing can help quite a lot for keeping your brain focused. Benoit says the Emacs entry will be quite large. Yeah, if you clock your Emacs usage or configuration, then you're going to get really sad probably. Marston says, I use Activity Watch, which monitors my activity. You know, you could probably write something like that for Emacs as well to automatically clock tasks with org mode. But the question is, you probably, well, no, maybe you can do multiple clocks at the same time. If you can do multiple clocks at the same time, then you could have an automated clocking system that you wrote alongside the ones that you're actually clocking for yourself. Adam says, I honestly don't spend time worrying about looking back. It's all about what I'm doing in the moment. Yeah, I kind of agree with that. Yeah, looking back too much can be a drag a little bit, and you'll waste time thinking too much. But it can also be useful sometimes. Garzola says, getting things done, deep work, productivity porn. Oh yeah, that was sort of the thing back in, what was it, like 2006, 2007, whenever like productivity blogs were all the rage and getting things done had just surfaced as a big deal, and like, you know, 4-hour work week and all those things. Yeah, that period of time was really crazy. Just too much fetishizing of productivity. I don't really fetishize productivity personally. I kind of feel like creativity should drive what I'm doing, and sometimes you can't really put a clock on creativity, but sometimes you have to, because you have things that you're responsible for doing, and you have to get them done in a certain amount of time. So it really just depends on what the requirements are on any given day. All right, replicating your configuration. When you want to set up a new machine, how easy is it to get the same configuration running again on that new machine? This is a problem I've always had on Linux, where if I come up with a good setup on one machine, there's certain things I'll commit into a Git repository, but then there's other things I can't. So for instance, like XFCE configuration or any other larger desktop environment configuration, sometimes you can't really replicate those easily because you have to go through their graphical configuration tools to set up certain things. So you have to remember where you went to, and let's say they update a version of something and they change the UI, you don't really know where to go to set the same configuration before. So when you're crafting your own system configuration, eventually it becomes more and more important for you to try to make it so that your configuration is replicable on other machines, because one day you're going to have to install your stuff on another machine, or maybe reinstall your current machine, and you're going to want to get your configuration back to the way you had it. And if it's hard to do that, you may not go to the trouble to do it again. You may just, go back to something else that you were using before, before you made your own config. So I think it's an important thing to think about, and it's an important principle to use when you choose tools. How replicable is the configuration? If it's a text-based configuration, then it's much more replicable than something that requires you to use an interface, user interface to configure it, and then maybe has it stored in its own file format. And it's really basically the next thing as well. Like, these two kind of go hand in hand. Tools that aren't that configurable or don't have text configuration. You need a program that allows you to configure it without UI and with a text-based config that you can check into source control. This is really the only way that you're going to get a replicable configuration across machines. This is why I focus primarily on GNU Emacs, GNU Geeks, and other programs that allow me to configure with text, so I can check it all into my source repo for my .files. And then when I clone it on another machine, it's very easy for me to just put that same configuration back down on the machine and then start using it again. I've tried to eliminate many of the programs that I use that don't allow me to share my configuration that way. Now, there can be programs that you configure primarily through a user interface, but the files that you get out of that are text and can be checked into source control. One really good example of this is OBS. I actually was able to very easily migrate my streaming setup from one machine over to this machine when I blew up my other streaming machine, because I had those configuration files already checked into my Git repository. And thankfully I had checked them in recently so that I had the most recent stuff there. So it's not a hard requirement that the program be fully configurable only by text, but just that the configuration be stored as text, so it's very easy to check that into a Git repository. So yeah, when you're choosing programs, definitely keep that in mind. You really want to try to find programs that can be configured with text and allow you to replicate that configuration without a whole lot of headache, because otherwise it's going to be a real big problem next time you need to set up another machine. So, the problem there is if the programs that you already use aren't that configurable by text, you have to find replacement programs, and, it takes time sometimes to find replacements to things that you use. Let me see if I can think of one that I've had to find a replacement for in the past. I'm trying to think of the different types of programs I use. Well, I haven't found a good replacement for music software yet. So I like making music sometimes. I don't do it that much anymore, but I like to do that. And most music making programs don't do very good with configuration files. Ardor is a very well-known music program in Linux, and it does have text configuration files, but they are extremely hard to understand, and they change the configuration file basically every time you open the program. Like, it's saving Windows state in the config files, and it's very difficult to keep that in source control, because every time you open the program, it changes the config in arbitrary ways that you either have to decide if you're going to commit it or just let it sit there for a while until you sync it later. I don't know. So I haven't yet found a program. Maybe I just haven't tried as many yet, but I haven't found a program yet that will allow me to have that level of text-based configuration while still having a very good, music creation environment. There's a program called Z-Rhythm that might be good for that, but I haven't spent a lot of time with it. The couple times I did use it, it was crashing a lot, so I haven't really experimented enough with it yet. Hey, O4F. Yeah, I think that's all I'll say about that for right now, but it's another area that we might talk about again in the future. And lastly, there is the meta of crafting, like the sort of the high level perspective of system crafting. How much time should you spend on it? It's one problem that you can have when you get into this whole area. You can waste a lot of time bike shedding on your configuration, and it might not feel very productive. And it might not be very productive. It really just depends on how you sort of structure your time, I guess. So it's easy to sink a whole lot of time in it and not really get a lot out of it. And it sort of goes hand in hand with the next two pieces, which are, should you go fully custom all at once or do it gradually? If you haven't done it at all, I would say definitely do it gradually. Start with a single tool that you're trying to configure, like let's say Emacs. That's a very good starting point. And then once you've sort of mastered that tool, you feel like you've got a good workflow going with it, then you can try to move on to other things and try to change, like maybe your window manager. So start with one piece of your tool set, then move on to something else, maybe like the window manager or your shell or anything like that. And try not to do everything at once, because if you do everything at once, one of the big risks is that you're gonna just give up, because it's gonna get too complicated and it's gonna be very hard to be productive in that new environment, because you've got too many things changing all the time, or maybe things are kind of half working or it's buggy or anything like that. So just try to do one thing at a time, basically, and then save the other configuration stuff for later as sort of like a reward to yourself in a way. Like, you know, I'll do that later after I've spent some more time with this one tool and maybe learn some more things about it. Mary says, if you start with Emacs, you'll probably never finish. Yeah, that's true, because Emacs is kind of endless. But you can get to a point of being comfortable with it before you go too further into other things. Now, I'm not saying don't go and try to set up a window manager also, but don't go and try to like redo everything, because it will be painful. But a lot of people do it. So, I mean, who am I to tell you not to do what you want to do? How long should you use a particular setup before changing it? Well, that's another big topic. The question is, do you really understand the value of a particular setup if you only spend a week with it? Do you really understand how it can be improved, or whether it's right for you if you only spend a week with it? Sometimes you need a little bit more time with a tool before you can understand how it's meant to be used rather than how you think you should use it. So sometimes it's better to spend maybe a month or more with a particular tool or a particular setup that you created to really understand the ins and outs, and also to think of ways you can optimize it instead of just reaching for the next tool. So window managers is a good example of this. Don't try to like switch a window manager every week or every 2 days. Try to spend a little bit of time with them and try to be conscious of the problems that you run into. Like, I wish that, excuse me, like if you're thinking to yourself, I wish that when I open a window, it would do X instead of doing the thing that it does right now. If you have those thoughts, keep track of those thoughts, because those are actually your own natural preferences coming to the surface. And you can either try to find out how to do those with your current setup, or find a tool that does that thing better. And I think it's a thing that you can benefit from with this sort of natural, excuse me, this natural mechanism you have in your mind to sort of perceive problems. A problem typically is an opportunity, or it can just be information to you about what you're doing, and you know, you use it to improve your situation. All right. I don't think there's anything else I wanted to say on that right now, but anyway, that's a lot of different aspects of crafting your own system, just a lot of different ideas and thoughts. And what I really want to know is if there's any areas of this you think are more interesting to focus on, because I would like to start making videos about more high-level stuff like this. Maybe even doing more streams where we try different tools, or maybe think about different ways of configuring a workflow. So if you're watching the recording of this, definitely leave comments below, or if you're watching the stream right now, you can leave comments later as well. But let me know what you think about all of this, so that we can think about more videos to make in the future, because I kind of feel like making tutorial videos is nice, but to really get that extra value, we need to talk about higher level aspects of this whole process so that we can all learn something from it. All right, so the next thing I wanted to do was a little bit of live coding, but I'm going to take a break for a second just to see if anybody has any other thoughts or questions. And I think we're getting pretty close to, maybe we got about 30 minutes left in the stream. So it's a good little bit of time to focus on some live coding. Let me check that the chat is okay here. Is the chat dead, or is it just... Okay, Garjola said something. Haha. Well, Garjola, you bring up a good point. Strategies to fight the systems they want to force on us at work. Yeah, that's something that we'll have to talk about at some point, I think. How can you use better tools if they are trying to enforce something on you at work? Benoit says, we'll have to go. By the way, the Docker Emacs works on WSL. Just try. We'll document that later. Great. I'm interested to learn what you found from that. Okay. Oh, Marston says it would be fun to do a group hackathon. Yeah, I want to set that up at some point. I've been thinking about it for a while. I just haven't gotten around to planning something yet, but I'm definitely going to do a System Crafters community hackathon at some point. If any of you have ideas on what you would like to see for that, definitely let me know, because I'm very interested in trying to do that. Henrik says you should start having guests for these system crafting videos. Diversity is inspiration. Yes, I definitely want to do that too. I was trying to do that today, and it didn't work out, but we will do it other times for sure. Benoit says code the bot during a hackathon. Yeah, we could definitely do a hackathon just for that. So the next thing I wanted to do today, so after writing dotcrafter.el for the Learning Emacs Lisp series, if you don't remember what that is, dotcrafter.el is a package for managing your org mode based system configuration. So if you have org files that have a bunch of code blocks in them for different parts of your system config, like your Emacs configuration or other programs, you need a way to tangle those files out to the file system so that they can be used by the programs that you're configuring. And dotcrafter.el is a package that sort of automates part of that process. It automates both tangling the dot files and doing symbolic links of these config files to their real locations in the home folder. So I realized that there's a bit of a chicken and egg problem whenever you are using something like dotcrafter.el, because in my case, I don't check in the generated source files to my Git repo anymore. I used to do that, but now I don't, because I have a tool that automates this for me. So the problem that you'll have is when you clone your .files repo to another machine, you don't have those config files there to get started with. You have to generate the output files first. And since we don't have dotcrafter installed yet, we can't actually do that because we can't run the dotcrafter commands to generate everything. Now, what you could do is just open up Emacs and go run org babel tangle on everything and get the output files set up right. But that's sort of a manual step that I would like to try to avoid. So what I wanted to do today is to try and come up with a way to provide a bootstrapping script for dotcrafter.el that will do this initial process for you, where it can go and grab the dotcrafter.el package and install it locally, and then use it to generate your output configuration files before you actually start up your Emacs using that configuration for the first time. I haven't thought about this too much, so we're gonna be doing it a little bit on the fly, but that's sort of the point, I guess, is just to see how I approach this. So first of all, let's go. Adam says GNU stow with a simple Git repository to Bootstrap. Well, sure, you could do that, but if you're trying to manage all your config files with org mode, then you can't do it unless you've already checked in those files. You need to generate them first. You could have a simple bootstrapping repo as well, but I feel like it's extra overhead, in my opinion. All right, so projects, code, dotcrafter. Let's see if I have the latest here. Adam says you don't need to do all of your files. Yeah, that's definitely something I'm thinking about for this as well. Let's check the Git status. Is there anything from origin? Let's see. Ah. Oh, do I have like a different commit? That's fun. All right, so let's bootstrap.el. So the idea here is that we want to be able to pull down either the full dotcrafter package or maybe some subset of the package. Right now, you see that there's only dotcrafter.el. So since we don't have separate files for all the functionality, we could just pull that one elisp file and load it up. That may be what we start with, but eventually we would have to do something different in the future. If there are multiple module files for dotcrafter inside of this package. But the easiest thing to do at first would be to just download that single file from a Git repository and then put it on the local machine and then run it. So let's see. I think there is a function called URL retrieve that gives you a callback with the information. I love how I'm still having this issue where things are popping up in the wrong place. So here, let's I'm gonna move this down here. Helpful. Okay, and then we'll go back to the chat here. All right. So let's grab the URL for that file. I will go to dotcrafter.el, and I'm going to go to the raw file here, copy the link for that. I'll paste it in here to a string, and maybe I can set q dotcrafter URL. All right. So now I can jump to shell, cd projects code, dotcrafter, and I could try to run that. So emacs-q-l bootstrap.el. I think that works, right? Whoa, no, okay. Batch. I think batch goes here. Batch? Yeah, okay. So let's write a message as well. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use compile instead. And I can set this to emacs-q-batch-l bootstrap.el. And then I'll move this compiler output window to here. Now we can see that hello message is written out. So for those of you who don't know, compile is a built-in command in Emacs that gives you the ability to run a compiler and get the output of the compiler every time you run that command over again using the recompile command. So if I run recompile, it's going to run this the command in this window again, so it makes it easy to redo your compilation every time. I don't think I have a binding set up for Control-C, Control-R to redo it, but we'll skip that for now. Okay, so one thing I can try to do here is use URL retrieve. And let me pull up the docs one more time. So URL and callback. So I'm going to say URL retrieve dotcrafter URL, and then I'll pass in a lambda as a callback. Yeah, you can hit GR on the compile window to reload it, but that requires jumping down to that window, which I don't want to have to do, but I'm going to continue to do it anyway, probably. Retrieve asynchronously and call callback with CB args when finished. So, all right. So I think it doesn't inherently have any arguments. And I think what this does is it writes out the response of the request as the body, as a buffer. So what was that function? Buffer to string? No. Buffer string returns the contents of the current buffer as a string. So I could try to do message response. Yeah, maybe that's not the greatest idea. Here, this is what we'll do first. We will switch to buffer, current buffer. I think that's the right one. Yeah, current buffer. Okay. So I'm going to use URL retrieve, and then I'm going to go to the buffer whenever it finishes. In fact, I can just run that right here and not run it as a separate script. Control-X, Control-E. Wrong number of arguments. For which one? So switch to buffer has buffer or name. That one's fine. Current buffer, I don't think it needs any arguments, so that's fine. So maybe the lambda, for some reason, it doesn't like it. So callback is called when the object has been completely retrieved with the current buffer containing the object. Blah, 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 blah. It is called as apply callback status CBR. So it does need a parameter, I think. Okay, there we go. So this is the response of calling that. And it does seem that we did get the elisp back. However, this has more than just the file contents in it. It also has all of the response headers. So I need to jump forward and skip all of that. I think that in my live crafter code, I had a way around that. So let's say URL retrieve. Yeah, research forward. So I'm using research forward to just jump ahead in the file to the place where the contents are. Not sure what this message is. Thank you. All right, so let's see. Let's run this now. All right, so now I jumped ahead to where the comment of the file is. And now if I want to get the rest of the content of the buffer, let's see. I want to take that and put it into an output file. So I could probably, let's see, save buffer, and then save buffer can take save buffer in visited file if modified. Is there like a with file? I'm sure I'm supposed to know the function for this already, because I'm trying to find the way to set the output file. Let's see, save file. Buffer file, yeah, buffer file name. I think there's, I mean, I could just set that basically. So set q buffer file name /temp / dotcrafter.el. Oops. And then instead of switching that buffer, I can just use save buffer. And in theory, that should save it. So let's see if I do that now. Actually, I don't want that part. I want to mark it first. Let's see, set mark. Yeah, set mark command. Can I call that non-interactively? All right, so what does this tell me to use instead? Push mark, not set mark. So what I'm trying to do here is basically delete that part of the buffer. Why not just killing from beginning of line to point? That's what I'm trying to do. Let's see. Oh, kill region. Kill region. Cut text between point and mark. Or is there delete region? Delete region. Yeah, delete region. Start and end. Okay, so I could probably just do that instead. So delete region. So point min, I think point min, and then point. Yep, and then I can do -1. Let's see, maybe I can do that. Point -1. All right, so instead of doing this, Oh, let's move that up too. I'm going to put that switch buffer back in so we can just see what it does. Switch to buffer, current buffer. And then we'll run this now. All right, so that seems to have worked for the most part. In fact, let's take this -1 out because maybe that's not needed. And then run it again. Okay, cool. So that seems right to me. So this is what we want to save now. So we can now take this bit back out, uncomment these 2 lines, and we should be able to save that to dotcrafter.el in the temp folder. Okay, it says wrote temp.crafter.el, and I can look at temp/dotcrafter.el, and the file contents seem to be there. Wait, that's not right. Oh, okay. It's already open as a buffer, so that's why it does that. Let's try that one more time. /temp/dotcrafter.el. Cool, so that seems right. So now we've downloaded that file using Emacs. And one thing I didn't mention is that this script is meant to be run using Emacs. So the assumption is you will, when you set up a new machine, you install Emacs, and then you run this script to pull down the dotcrafter source and then run it, basically. So we've got the file. And now that we've got it saved, we want to load that file. So we can run load-file /temp/dotcrafter.el. And then we can... let's just do a little test here. Let's say message... We're just going to write out a name of a function. So dotcrafter tangle dotcrafter tangle org file. See, I know this is not... We're just testing to see if the function will be written out. Not the contents, just the object itself, basically. So I'm going to run recompile here. And, okay, it's loading the warning. Okay. Use keywords rather than deprecated positional arguments. Oh, okay, yeah, for sure. Yeah, basically what I did wrong there. Whoopsie. Now I've destroyed my window layout, which is wonderful. Let's just set that back up again. We'll go back to bootstrap.el. We'll split this window, scroll it over just a bit, and then go back here and pop this out one more time. All right, so workspace 1, cool. All right, so now what we did see is that it did get loaded. It got downloaded and loaded. Compilation buffer. And I think what I need to do here, well, yeah, it doesn't really work like that. Simon says win or undo. I was doing that, and it got into a state where it didn't pull my window config back correctly, so I lose. So now, what we need to do is, so here's one problem. You need to specify the set of files that are part of your .files by default, and typically you do that in your dotcrafter.el configuration. So here, dotcrafter, and I have my dotcrafter org files setting. So basically, these are the files that need to be set up in the beginning. These are my sort of my core configuration files. And I don't necessarily need all of these, and I really don't want all of these unless I decide to have them. So I can make this be a subset, but the problem is that these should not be configured inside of this bootstrap script. They should be somewhere else. There may be some other file that we need inside of our configuration, just a very simple file that has a list in it of these file names, so that dotcrafter can pick those for bootstrapping. But for now, we'll just leave it like this, where we set the dotcrafter org files. And I can also run dotcrafter, I think it's update .files. Yeah, that's the name of the command. So generate .files and place symbolic links. So now to pull this from somewhere else. Thanks, Garjola. So, the last thing I would probably do here is try to pull this from some other file, but for now we can just use it like this. And the other thing I wanted to do is, I think I have demo.el here. I set a couple things in demo.el because I want it to override the default file locations. I don't want it to pick up things, or I don't want it to put any new files in my real .files folder. So I'm going to say dotcrafter output directory. This is just a temporary thing for testing purposes. I'll set this to bootstrap output. And then I also need to set my .file path, I believe. So set q .files folder. So dotcrafter .files folder. Okay. And I'm going to say that is my / .files directory. Okay, I'm gonna put this back here because I think it looks ugly. Okay, so now I have those two settings. That should be enough to make this work off the rip. Let's try recompiling one more time. So it's pulling the script, loading it up, and probably it's trying to generate the dot files right now. Not really getting any output. I need to add some output for when it tangles files like that. Okay, so we got some kind of error here. DW system settings get. Yeah, I have that problem. Yeah, whenever you have a function that loads your settings for your configuration, then you have extra things that need to happen. So maybe that's something that I need to figure out a way to deal with. Because in my specific configuration, I have like settings objects where I'm storing certain things like, let's say, DPI. So I have this variable DW system settings. It needs to be loaded so that it can be used by some other functions. And I think I haven't added anything to load that up before running the tangle operation. Problem is, there is a bit of a chicken and egg problem here too, because I need these files written out before I can tangle other files. So, and let's see. Maybe what I should do is change the order of the files that I'm outputting here so that they can be loaded correctly whenever the time comes. So I'll put it right here instead. All right. Let's recompile one more time, see what it does. Use keywords rather than deprecated positional arguments to define minor mode. Okay, I think I need to update my minor mode code because it doesn't like something about that. And this still complains. Truth for Life asks, is DW a directory? No, that's just a namespace I have for my own function. And I think that the problem here is that the function doesn't exist because I'm not loading up that file. DW system settings get. Which file is that from? So in my own .files folder, whoops. Inside of .emacs.d, I think they have a DW settings module. And that's happening in the desktop file. Does it even tell me what the error is? It doesn't say anything other than just... Oh, void function, sorry. So, that should be loaded already, I think. Because I think that in my Emacs file... DW load settings? Load system settings, okay. Load system settings. See, I've had a weird issue where sometimes if I do this once only, it doesn't load it correctly. I don't know why. Settings.el. Yeah, I'm calling load file. Ah, that's why, because I'm not evaluating these files. I'm only loading them. So if I were to do something, yeah, that doesn't work, does it? Yeah, it's almost like I have to have another file that needs to be loaded first. So for bootstrapping, there needs to be a little bit of configuration probably to say if there's any auxiliary files that need to be loaded. But there's a problem where if one file generates a file, so like my systems.org file generates a file containing settings, and if another org file needs to use settings from that file to change the way it templatizes something, then I need to load that settings file before that next file runs. So somehow in between generating one file and then generating the next file, or reading the next file, I need to have loaded another file. So that is a little bit complicated for this process. Which function are you asking about, Truth for Life? Just anything with dw/ in front of it? Because dw/ is something that I put in my function names for functions that I wrote for my own configuration. So let's see. So it's like we need a way to have a hook between generating specific files and it seems a little hacky to get that in there. It's something that I didn't think about so far with my own config with dotcrafter because I'm usually running dotcrafter after Emacs has already been loaded, and my Emacs config loads that settings file already. So now I need to think about the bootstrapping scenario whenever nothing is loaded, none of my configuration is loaded. It needs to be able to get things straight from scratch, which means it needs to load my settings so that, my personal settings, so that there's other files that can take those settings and use them while generating their output files. So if we were to look at the bootstrap.el file here again, we have this list of org files, but I wonder if there needs to be a different way to describe this for the bootstrapping procedure. I don't really like that because I would prefer if you only had one place where you configured everything for dotcrafter and it didn't have to be like special configuration only for bootstrapping, because it feels a little bit limited if you do it that way. However, this could be a general problem with using... I'll answer your question in a second, Garjola. I saw that. This could be an issue with general usage, because if you think about it, if you change your settings, like if you're already in an existing setup, you're in Emacs, you change your settings in an org file, those need to be reevaluated before tangling happens so that those changes go into effect immediately. So this may be a thing that needs to be part of the original design in general, and not just a facet for bootstrapping. So for instance, for a particular file like systems.org, maybe your org files are specified in order that they need to be generated. So we generate systems.org, and then there needs to be an action that happens after systems.org gets generated. So for instance, maybe a function needs to be called, or one of the output files needs to be loaded. So instead of having it just be a flat string, it could be also like, be also a cons pair, where you could have some code that also gets run as a result of this. So let's say, like, it could be a lambda, and it could be load file. Well, I want to do require basically. If I could do require, why did I do that? Require DW settings, which is my settings module, and then I could do DW load, load system settings. That would be kind of nice because then I'd be able to say that after this file gets generated, do this thing before the next step happens. So instead of it being a list of org files, it would more be like a recipe for generating your dot files based on the things that need to happen. So I actually kind of like the idea better because it makes it more powerful. You generate the output of systems.org, and then you can run a command afterwards or a function afterwards that does some stuff before it moves on to the next file. This would definitely be necessary whenever you have dependencies between files. Like one file needs to be generated first, and then other files need to make use of information that came out of this file. So right now, I can't change the file in the repo, so I would have to comment this out so I can edit this temp file directly. So I think I have dotcrafter from temp folder, dotcrafter org files. So tangle org files for each of these here, we call dotcrafter tangle org file. So it would be tangle org file that would need to understand this new logic. Probably won't spend much more time on this. I think we've been, let's see. You're gonna see Hall of Mirrors for a second. We've been on for hour 56, okay. So in this function, we receive an org file. And we need to check to see if it's a pair. Is there a pair function? Cons pair p? What does that use? Def alias cons pair. Yeah. Come on. Cons pair question mark. What function do you really use? Wow. So there's just no way to tell whether something is a cons pair. I guess I could do... Yeah, I could just do could or safe. Test. Okay, that returns nil. I like that. All right, so org file. Here I could set post action is could or safe org file. Is there also a car safe? Car safe. Not Adam Foo? Okay, let's see. Oh, awesome. Okay, that's great. Thanks, Felipe. So, well, this can work for now. Let's see, car safe. Yeah, okay. So what I can do is have another one here, real org file, car safe. Now, let's check that, though. What happens if I do that? Car, okay. I may need to use a... Okay, so that doesn't work. So I'll have to do the check. Yeah, this is not so great, but not Adam. No. Let's do... What? Return T if object is not a cons cell. Okay. So not Adam org file. That tells me if it's a pair. So if this is a pair, then I can do, well, I could just do could or safe no matter what, just for simplicity's sake. But in this case, I need to check if it is a pair. Then I need to use car on the org file. And if it's not a pair, then I can use the file directly, org file. Okay, so now I can use real org file here. And then link config files, and then when post action, then when post action, then I need to use fun call. I think that should work. Fun call, post action. I'm not really passing any parameters. Felipe says there's also -const pair. That actually comes from the -.el library, so I'm trying to use something that doesn't require an external dependency. Adam says it means being open to having some config files being pre-built in a Git directory. Yeah, I mean, you can always do that, but I'm trying to avoid it if possible. All right, so we've tangled the file, we linked the files, and now if there's a post action, we will call the post action function. And in this case, we've set that up for this one to require my settings path. But the problem is I haven't added my .files folder to the load path. So I might need to be more specific about this. So I may actually need to use load file, which is not necessarily the greatest thing, but let's do it for now and see what happens. So I'll say /.file /.emacs.d/lisp, and then put DW settings inside of that. .el. All right, so there's that. Yeah, that worked. And then load system settings. Okay, so now maybe this will work. We can try running this again, recompile. All right. Void variable is pair. Oh, I need to be making this a let star. My bad. All right. Run recompile again. Taking its time. Seems to be working this time. Okay, says .files are up to date. I don't know what this last complaint is. Lisp error, wrong argument type, string P. That's weird. Okay, let's check the output folder and see if it actually worked. Home, David Will, projects, code, dotcrafter, Bootstrap output. Okay, yeah, looks, whoa, okay, it did symlink some things. This is gonna break my config. Great. But anyway, it did seem to actually work to bootstrap that. So I basically pulled the script down from the repo, had to make a little bit of a tweak to it, but I can check that in later. And then bootstrap it from scratch just using a script. And if I were to do that in my repository, I would probably just have that same command, this emacsq batch l be a bootstrap.sh inside of my repository bin/sh. So long as I have Emacs installed, then I should be able to just run this bootstrap script. I would have to keep this bootstrap.el script as part of my repository, but that would be sort of the prerequisite to using this, is that you need to have that file there just so you can get what you need on your machine to then start using this thing from scratch. So I'm fairly happy that we got something working for that. It needs some more work to make it good for everyone, but I think we accomplished the goal of being able to bootstrap my .files and probably break them as I just did this, but I'll go fix that after this video is over, or after the stream's over. All right, anyway, that's it for today. Let me check if I had anything else left in the... Nope, that was it for the slides. So hopefully that was an interesting, useful discussion for you today on the challenges of system crafting, and also a little bit of live coding there to end it all off. Next week, I'm not sure what we'll do on the live stream, because I'll be in a different place and time at that point. So I'll be thinking about it between now and then. But if you have any ideas, definitely feel free to let me know in the comments or on IRC or Discord, etc. And for the video next week, if I don't get to finish the Geeks install video, which is somewhat likely given the fact that the bug that they hit is still not fixed yet, then I might go on to one of the other series that I have in mind to make a video that would be interesting. Maybe the new Magic video series. That's probably the most likely one, because I already have that content prepared so I can just get that video done pretty fast. So it will either be the Geeks install video or the first Magit video that we're going to go more in depth on how to use Magit for your day-to-day Git workflow tasks. All right, so before we head out, I just want to say thank you to my sponsors. And as always, I haven't updated the screen again. I was literally working on a script this week to automate this whole process to get this showing from Emacs and have it be updated automatically so I don't have to update an image every time, but I didn't get to get it done before this week. So over the next few weeks, I'll have a lot more time to do that. So this screen is going to be very different. I'm actually going to display all this stuff in Emacs somehow. I think it'll be pretty cool. So I won't have to be making an image anymore. So anyway, thank you so much to the people who have decided to sponsor the work that I'm doing, making videos about GNU Emacs, GNU Geeks, and all the other assorted things that we talk about on this channel. I'm very thankful to them for their support. If you are interested in also becoming a sponsor of the channel, check out the links I have below in the description. I'm on both GitHub sponsors and on Patreon. There's also a link to PayPal for one-time tips. And also, if you want another way to support the channel that doesn't require a financial contribution, you can just like this video or any other video that you watch on this channel, and also share the videos with your friends and people who might be interested in learning more about these things. So yeah, that's all for today. Thanks so much everyone who showed up today. I really appreciate all of you for being here and contributing to the discussion and watching me stumble around, babbling and doing weird stuff on my computer. It's a lot of fun for me. So Garjola says speed bar. Let's see. Let's break the stream now. Speed bar. Okay, well, it worked. Cool. I don't know why it's covering this window up though. So this is the kind of thing I was worried about. Like it could do anything that, yeah, okay. So I think cool. Maybe I didn't destroy my entire setup by doing that. Anyway, oh, you didn't see it. Let me pull back up the screen really quick. Speed bar. Let's do it one more time, just so you know I did it. Okay, there it is. Speed bar worked. It didn't destroy my Emacs configuration. That's great. All right. Anyway, thanks a lot, everybody, for showing up today. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. Happy hacking. Thanks. Now I have to make sure that I can get out of here. The speed bar is in the way. There we go. Right now. See ya.